All right, so this is Ella Surround recording and reporting for James Cole. Today we'll be talking about the difference between a team and investors. As you put it, beware the swinging doors. I really actually love that phrase and would like to get started with that. What brought you to the reality of this swinging door phenomenon, and what does it mean to you?
All startups, all people, but certainly startups, and certainly in their early days, have this phenomena of sort of selling. The industry term is vaporware, like you're sort of selling things that you don't have. You're faking it till you make it. Is the common term, and so that sort of reminds me. And so I started using the analogy of the swinging doors at a restaurant, where in the front of house, you're marking things up dramatically. Like a pasta dish might cost $22. That box of pasta only costs $1.50, right? And so there's an enormous markup, and you have to make it worth that markup to the patron. And so you're smiling and you're putting on a show and you're trying to make everything seem very civilized and worthy of that price point, when the reality often in the kitchen is that there's chaos and mistakes and sort of problems occurring, grease fires, cursing. I've spent a little bit of time in kitchens and have a lot of friends that are chefs, and chefs have a reputation for having tempers, having drug and alcohol problems, working all hours of the day and night, and so on. And so those two things are at war with each other. And it's the same thing when you're running a company, where your team and yourself, when you're working on the business, it's all out war. And then you have to go sell to potential clients, potential investors, potential employees, sometimes your family, friends, girlfriend, you name it. Like, you're sort of selling to the outside world a more polished version than the chaos that's happening in your head or inside the company.
You've actually touched on this chaos that you've experienced a few times in past sessions that we've done here, especially with your time at We Heart It, I believe, and other places. Are there ever any few moments that really stick out to you as being formative experiences within that space?
Yeah, definitely. Just to sort of frame it, I mean, I think if you're doing it right as a human, you're sort of constantly on the frontier of chaos. There's order and there's chaos, there's yin and yang, in more Eastern terminology. And if you're pushing the envelope, if you're in a room that challenges you, if you're in a relationship that challenges you, what have you, there's elements of security and something that feels nice and safe. And then there are elements that feel quite chaotic and foreign. And that's where I like to live, is sort of right on that bleeding edge, because I think it just makes me better. My grandfather was a big baseball lover, and he always used to say, you should try to hit the fastest pitching you can. Like, put yourself in front of the best pitchers always. So yeah, I think I love chaos. And I think if you're going to survive as an entrepreneur, you have to thrive in chaos a little bit, or seek it a little bit like that, even masochistically almost, like you like to put yourself through pain because it's always so chaotic. Things that stick out to me. The first thing that popped into my head was, I started the company on a shoestring. I think I've told you before, $20,000 that was partially my money and partially my dad's. And rubbed those sticks together for a while. And when we decided to make software, a mentor of mine at the time introduced me to a team of sort of an agency that helped build software. And they said they could build what was inside my head, the first version of it, for $75,000. Like, I've never bought a house. I've never bought a car. Like, other than rent in New York City, which is exorbitant, I've never spent remotely that much money in one place before. And that just felt like a crazy thing. So I built the hub overseas, first with a developer in Korea, then in Belarus, and then one team in Ukraine, and then another team in Ukraine. And they all sort of let me down in different ways, which is why I hopped from team to team. And they were about a fourth the cost on a per hour basis as teams stateside. So I thought I was brilliant, and all the hours I was up because of the time zone and the time zone difference would be worth it. And then I finally got a team stateside, And after a couple months of working for me, one of them came up to me and said, listen, like, we're taking 3 steps forward, 3 steps back, 3 steps forward, 3 steps back. Every time we build something new and ship it, put it out into the world, 4 other things in the software break. And so we're treading water, and this is never going to get anywhere unless you burn it to the ground. So I'd spent a couple $100,000 at this point and almost 2 years building the first version of the software. And my American team said they could rebuild it state of the art in 12 weeks. So I said, you're on. And 12 weeks came, and then 14, and then 16. I would get in daily fights with Jason, who led that team. We're now very, very dear friends. He still works at the company, but we were really at each other's throats. He was having some health problems stemming from how hard he was working. You know, he was giving me everything, but everything wasn't enough because, you know, we were 2 months past deadline and there were real ramifications for that. So that was really chaotic, and it really, one of my best employees quit from that sort of 4-month chaotic experience. Like, she just couldn't take it anymore. Jason and I, you know, I'm surprised that he didn't quit, frankly, and I'm very grateful he did not. But it was a rough time and definitely put a lot of strain on all parties.
Was there an element of that experience that then had the swinging door element to investors? You know, what did people see on the outside world?
Yeah, when it launched, that's when I tried to invest. This metaphor, when I use it most, I use it to talk about when I tried to raise my seed round and failed to do so. And I was going back into the kitchen, watching them build this software. And then as soon as it was built, another part of my team was trying to take it to market and get a lot of people to use it very quickly because we were behind schedule. So what I was selling to investors was like, hey, we're about to launch, we're about to launch, we're about to launch. Okay, we've launched. Okay, we're growing, we're growing, we're growing. And that's the story I was telling. And we're about to launch, we're about to launch. Come on, come on, guys, come on. We're late. And then, okay, we're growing. I was like, guys, we got to fucking grow like fast. Like, I need this to be like hockey stick shit because we don't have that much time. And partly because we were late, partly because of how we grew, but mostly I think just because I was new to how investing works and how VCs work. I failed to raise. I couldn't raise the money, which then led to making cuts, downsizing the team, getting rid of our office, trying to sell the company, which took us to COVID, right? So my company's completely different today than it was a year ago, because a year ago was probably right about when I gave up trying to raise. I started in July of last year, and September, maybe early September of last year, I basically said, I can't do this. Started making cuts, tried to sell the company starting in December, January. Had a couple people at the table in February, March, and then it all fell apart due to COVID. So I went from trying to raise millions of dollars to trying to sell for millions of dollars to cutting pretty much everyone except for the core team and rebuilding from the rubble.
Is there anything in particular that you learned from that experience or that you didn't anticipate really implementing, or whether you knew it and just kind of pushed it to the side, or whether it was a brand new learning experience?
Yeah, I learned every single one of life's lessons from that. Like, I lived a lifetime in that journey I just told you. And that sounds ridiculous, but I honestly feel like any lesson worth learning in life, I learned during that maybe like 1 year stretch. Like, the highest of highs, the lowest of lows. When I was on the floor, lowest of lows, like, I'm just fucked. I get an email that Good Charlotte wants to meet with me. Have I told you this story? You know the band Good Charlotte, right? So sometimes I tell this to our younger photographers, like trying to get a rise out of them, and they're like, I don't know who that is. So I'm glad we're of the same rough generation. Yeah, Good Charlotte. Next thing I know, I'm video chatting with Joel and Benji. Next thing I know, I'm flying out to LA to meet with them. They're going to invest in the company, and my saving grace is going to be a band I listened to when I was 13 years old, you know, which didn't end up happening. But I think like I learned a couple seminal things. Like, one is like, they're all truisms, right? Like, any good lesson, any good life lesson is sort of a cliche because you've heard it before. but when you actually learn it and run face first into it, it can really hit you. So I think like finding myself and finding the core essence of my company, like the truest version of my company in the rubble. Like I had built and built and built this very large structure with 15 employees and all kinds of bells and whistles. And some of it was rooted in profound truth, and some of it was just sort of bells and whistles, like fat around the muscle. And same thing for myself, same thing for how you grow yourself as a person. You know, who am I really? And when you are reduced, you know, when you feel like you failed, not just like, ah, darn, I wanted the promotion and I didn't get it, or, you know, but like really like on a pretty holistic level, because you have to remember, like, this is my life. Like all of me is in this. It's not a job to me. It's like, it's a way of life. So if it doesn't work, I don't work, you know, I'm, you know, it's an indictment on my character, on my ability as a human. So when that's called into question, you really have to answer, like, if not that, what am I? If I failed, am I still worthy of being alive? And I don't mean that in a suicidal sense so much as just an existential one. And so I had to re-find myself, and I had to re-find the company. And so the growth and the healthy trajectory we're on now had to come out of that rubble. And I think a lot of positive development, personally, professionally, romantically, comes from working through something tough and coming out stronger.
Part of the thing that really also struck me when you sent this prompt along was this idea of team versus investors, which kind of, if you flatten it, puts it that these two concepts are in opposition. I would love to unpack that a little bit. Do you think that there is an overlap, especially with teams that have equity in it? And, or, you know, should there be a separation of team versus investors the way there's supposedly a separation between church and state? Can you walk me through this a little bit?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I didn't mean any of that when I wrote it to you. I think what I meant is sort of like, again, just being on the different sides of the swinging door, being with your team in the truth, in the chaos, in the struggle, and then being with investors in a projection of the truth and a glamorization or window dressing of the truth. And those different worlds feeling very at odds with one another are quite bizarre. I don't know if I really see it as like team versus investors, but let me see if I can think about it and make it work. Like, you make a good point in your question that, like, equity, like, you just have so much of the pie to give away, and the two people that you give equity to traditionally are like your employees and investors. So that is one way in which they are very much at odds with each other. Usually you give you when you start the company, you put aside 10% of the business for employees and future employees, and you dole it out in small pieces, and the rest of it is saved for investors. So it's sort of a protected slice. I think, you know, investors have ulterior motives. You know, they want you to grow very quickly because there's something called IRR, internal rate of return, and it's how an investment fund is measured in terms of how well it's doing. And in overly simplistic terms, it's just, you know, their investments, like, are they appreciating in value on paper? You know, if they invest in the hub at an $8 million valuation, and I am now valued at $20 million by the next investor, or 24 million, they've tripled in value. And if their investments are all doing that, their internal rate of return, they're returning their money, their investment is growing. Investors want you to grow 20 to 25% a month, at least, you know, seed round and A investors. And that's like inhumane growth. Like, it's not normal. And so a lot of the brands that we all know and love, Allbirds shoes, Outdoor Voices, Casper mattresses, Away luggage, you know, all of these sexy e-com brands, or Uber or WeWork or what have you, almost all of them grow inefficiently. They spend a lot of money to get customers, and then they don't make that much money back from customers. and they're losing money every month, often, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, sometimes even billions of dollars a month. All of those brands I just mentioned, they're all not profitable. They're all businesses that should be dead. And the only reason they're alive is because investors have put in tens, hundreds, of millions or billions of dollars. So it's very odd, like this whole VC game that I'm about to get back into, because I'm going to try to raise in a couple months. They force you to do things that are inhumane and are bad for your business in the hopes that you'll sort of achieve what's called escape velocity. You keep raising money, which kind of pulls you down to earth. It's the gravitational pull, and you're wanting to grow and get out into outer space. And if you can you can resist the pull of gravity, then you win. And if you don't, then you fall to earth in a fiery mess. And 9 out of 10 startups fail. 7 out of 10 startups that have raised over $1 million from venture capitalists fail. So you can get $1 million and still have a 30% chance of success, 70% chance of failure. That's pretty crazy. So your team, buys into the vision. Your team are your soldiers, and you want to take care of them. You want to, even though people know startups are risky, having it fail and looking those people in the eye, and they really believed, they were really naked and vulnerable, and you really shared something. And failing for them is perhaps the most painful out of any person I'll have to look in the eye if my company fails. So investors forcing me to grow in a way that's inorganic and sort of inhumane and not natural pushes me so hard and so fast that it will bifurcate. I'll either win dramatically or fall into a fiery mess. Normal businesses follow a much safer path, which means that they probably won't grow like this, but their chance of success is 82% instead of 30, right? So long rambly answer, but trying to work through it. I think what you want at the end of the day is to take care of your team. Good leaders eat last. That's what they say. Like my team is my lifeblood. Without them, I'd be nothing. And so by taking on money from investors, I'm exposing the company to a chance at supreme success, but also enormous failure, huge risk. And so I'm putting my team at risk. It'd be like if we were driving Ella somewhere in a Prius and someone said, hey, do you want this, souped up Ferrari? Why don't you guys hop in this car? It'll be more fun. But if I drive 180 miles an hour around turns, there's a really good chance that we crash and die, right? So we might just want to take the Prius and get there in one piece. So raising money is sort of like that. Like you get to zoom around in a Ferrari for a while, but it might not end so well.
Well, to that point too, and to actually go back to the restaurant analogy, it almost sounds as if going the VC route is inviting people to the back of the kitchen, and then they are in charge and are telling the chefs who know what they're doing what to do, which can create some pretty bad cooking in my experience. So if that's the case, why do it?
I don't know, Ella. That's a great fucking point and a great question. I mean, why do it is capitalism. Like restaurants don't make much money. That's the answer. So like restaurants need investors. Restaurants need, patrons to be happy. Like if the chef just did what he wanted or she wanted and said, fuck you to anyone else, it might work sometimes, but other times people are like, I don't fucking know. This is like artsy, weird, futuristic food that I don't really get. I'm not going to come here. And then the restaurant fails. So you have to please the market, and the market can be patrons or investors or but you need capital from some source. So the reason to do it is you need capital to grow. And so you have to pay the piper. If you want the capital, you got to do what they say. But yeah, you're right. It's unpleasant. And so often I would say more often than I have a very cynical view of this. And admittedly, I haven't successfully raised from institutional investors. So a huge asterisk is I haven't been in these rooms. I've heard many stories. I've watched countless YouTube videos, read articles, and I've gone through the process of trying to raise and meeting 50 investors, but I haven't gotten past that point. So huge asterisks. But yeah, I mean, I think more than most, I think bringing that kind of influence in. I have a friend, Ella, who's a very successful entrepreneur. His company's, I don't know, 20 to 30 times bigger than mine, let's say. And he calls my company the art project. It's his way of taking a shot at me. Like it's this cute little thing that, like, yeah, it's making money, but it's like cute money, and like it's more of an idea. It's more of like a artistic expression than it is like a capitalist engine. And so when investors get involved, it will definitionally have to be a capitalist engine. And some of the artistry and some of the things I'm proudest of about my company will fall by the wayside in deference to things that will make us grow faster, make more money, please investors.
Did you ever consider growing the hub in the more organic kind of Prius way of 82% of more traditional businesses
Yeah,
actually?
that's what we're doing now. I mean, um, just let's talk Turkey. Why don't we? I think it's interesting for people. So at our peak, we were spending $280,000 a month running the business, like a house every month. And at our peak, we were bringing in $125,000 in revenue. So we were losing, 150K a month, torching it, right? So did the VC model. Now we're profitable, but we're only spending $33,000 a month. So 1/9 the expenditures. And we're bringing in $40,000 a month. So right now I'm bootstrapping it. Like right now I have a profitable business. I have a few grand a month to spend on advertising, and we are growing, but it's slow. A lot of it comes down to patience, like I see it more than I've ever seen it before. Like by being reduced to rubble, really tightening my company, really figuring out like what's the bones of this thing? Like what is this really? I see how healthy the business is at its purest form, and I see the potential of how big it could be. Like I modeled out last weekend, Ella, a path to get us to 100,000 posts, job posts a month, in the next 4 years. So thousands a day, 3,000 posts a day. So tens of thousands, maybe even 50,000 photographers will make a living on my platform. This time 4 years from now, like there's a path to get there that's very doable. I have no idea if we'll get there or not. We probably won't, statistically speaking, but it's the first time that I've modeled something out. When you model something out, you have to make, 7, 8, 9, 10 assumptions. This is how much we're going to acquire customers for. This is how much they're going to spend, and so on. But all of those assumptions I made feel very doable given where we are right now. But I do need 2 million of capital this spring, then 11 million of capital 18 months after that, then 24 million of capital 18 months after that. So over the next 3 or 4 years, I'm going to need, over $35 million injected into the business to continue growing it. It would just be a much smaller thing if I sort of only used the proceeds from the business. And the way that we're profitable too is I do a lot of manual work. So I'm consulting right now for 3 companies and bringing in $20,000 into the business that way. So half of our revenue is me consulting. So if I stopped doing that and focused exclusively on my baby, which is this software project, my baby wouldn't be profitable anymore. We'd lose 10 grand a month. So that's another reason to raise, is that I'm working 80-hour weeks, and it's partly because I'm working 2 jobs. I spend 40 hours a week consulting and 40 hours a week being the founder of my company.
And I'm curious too, just given the world of social media, which you mentioned earlier, when you go out and try to sell your company to investors, they typically get the shiniest and most put together version of it, where in the background there is chaos. But I do think that there is also a space on social media for chaos and for people to kind of take this glimpse in. Um, do you see a benefit to kind of lifting the veil, as we're doing on this series, into what the chaos is and letting investors know that actually it's kind of a mess backstage?
I mean, listen, a lot of what we've talked about, Ella, kind of in pretty abstract terms, is sort of like institutional power versus democratized power. Like that's what my business is democratized power, right? It's like 40,000 photographers from their living room shooting as opposed to one big ad agency. Or like, I happen to believe, I don't know if we've talked about this, that like higher education is about to take a nosedive, that like most colleges will go out of business in the next 5 years. So I think institutions are dying pretty quickly in almost every industry. Venture capital, at least for now, is among the most institutional. Like there are 20 or 30 funds that are the sort of the gatekeepers. And they have a way they like investing and a way they like seeing things, and you have to dance. You have to show them that, because everyone else is. And if you don't, like Lance Armstrong was busted for doping, for blood doping, and something like 60 or 70% of the Tour de France blood dopes, or did at the time, right? So like everyone he was competing against was also cheating. So in my mind, he's still a badass. Like the table stakes were higher. It's called an arms race in game theory, right? Like everyone's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's fucked up, and he should have been busted and stripped of everything. But I think he's a cheater, and I think he should be stripped because it's bad for the sport. But in my mind, he's still one of the greatest athletes that's ever lived. There's this arms race of the guy that pitched before me and the gal that pitched after me to the investor, they window dress. And so if I'm the guy in the middle not window dressing, I look like a schlub. So I think there's immense power in the democratized world, which is why we're doing this series, to lift the veil. Like the depression piece that you and I did together, I published it a day or two ago. I got like 30 messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years, like telling me they're privately struggling, saying how grateful they were that I shared my thing. I got 2 speaking opportunities out of it. People were really touched that I would be open about that, or this, or whatever. So I think within the social media space, the pendulum swinging the other way. People are tired of the bullshit and they want to have real conversations. Part of the current anger and civil unrest in our country, obviously a lot of it's focused on race or politics or really big, important things. But some of it is just that, like, let's stop the bullshit. Let's stop. Like, we're being lied to, whether it's like big pharma lying to us, or political figures lying to us, or, like, let's just be fucking real. I think people want that, but I don't think, like, some institutions that are still held on high don't want that. Like if a kid were to apply to Princeton University, which is where I went next year, and like be super real on his college app, like I don't think they'd reward that. Much like a VC, Sequoia isn't going to be particularly tickled if I'm like really honest about the chaos and all the mistakes we're making. So one day maybe, but not now.
What are some of the benefits that you see personally about being honest about the chaos behind the scenes?
I think personal freedom is one thing. You're not carrying around a lie. They talk about how carrying around lies or sort of emotional burdens can actually have a physiological effect of carrying a heavy sack, that like physiologically you get weighed down. I think another thing is clarity. If you're going to beat problems, you have to look at them. That's what I talk about with my depression. I think it's a line we that came out in our chat about depression. I call it turning the lights on the boogeyman. Like, let's just call it what it is. Like, let's fuck the stigma. Let's turn on the lights. oh, like, okay, that's not that bad. Like, it's a sock on a lampshade. It's not the boogeyman at all. Like, things are never as scary when you just look at them and break them into pieces and figure out how you're going to defeat the problem. So looking the chaos in the eye, realizing it's not quite as scary as you thought, and wielding it into order, chaos into order, is one of the most fulfilling things. So I think there's immense power in having the strength and conviction of self to look at chaos, to experience chaos, to subject yourself to chaos, and to find peace and order and meaning from that chaos.
As a business owner and a boss, how do you manage that chaos for your employees? And are there any tips you've learned along the way?
That's a fantastic question. This is something I really grapple with. In the beginning, I viewed myself as like the chaos eater. It's my job to absorb all of the chaos, all of the risk. And what I projected back to my team was a way cushier. I didn't want them to take on the risk that I'd taken on. I didn't want them to have the exposure. I didn't want them to get burned by the same flames. So what does that mean in practical terms? It means that I gave out almost no equity. I paid everyone market rate or higher. Like, a lot of startups are like, hey, you're worth 100 grand a year. I'm going to pay you 55 grand a year and you're going to get 3% of my company and we're going to the moon. Are you with me or not? And I was too insecure and too scared to ask that of someone else. I didn't want to disappoint them. So I just said, I'll just pay you the 100 grand and I'll give you 0.25% of my company. Like, you're worth 100 grand, or you're worth 110, because if this fails, I want you to have a little buffer in your bank account so you can find another job. Like, I don't want you to go without, you know? And it wasn't because I'm a nice guy. It was because I was scared. And I didn't want to be judged, you know? But a big learning for me, Ella, I think this goes for friendships, romantic relationships, letting someone share in the chaos with you, sitting next to someone in chaos. Like, you can't sit next to everyone in chaos. And you learn this in romantic relationships and friendships, and in business. Sometimes you sit next to someone in a chaotic circumstance and you realize that they're really not your ally, or that they're not bringing you peace, or you're not bringing them peace, or somehow the situation is made worse by each other's company. And then the special people you sit next to, and they make you feel calmer in the chaos. You feel better for them being there. And they feel better for being there too. So what I've learned is, like, the people that remained at the company were the people that actually wanted the chaos, that wanted a piece of it and to share and to sort of proverbially hold my hand, and vice versa, like, for us to be there for each other. So the epitome of this is Shannon, who I've talked about before on the series. Like, she was a photographer in our community. She dropped out of high school and just took a GED and got her diploma that way. She went to college for a semester and dropped out, and she worked at Chick-fil-A. So not the person I would have picked out of the litter, to be my right hand, but she grinded her face off in our community. And I saw that, and I kept giving her more little projects, and she kept doing them. And then I hired her full time for like $40K. And then 7 promotions later, 2 years later, she's my co-founder, right hand. And I can be real with her, and I can share the ugly truth. And I can feel comfort in the fact that someone sees my baby in all of its ugliness and still loves it. In the same way that when you're in a romantic relationship, you hope that you can show someone all of your ugliness and that they still love you for it. Or maybe they even love you because of it. That's even better. So sharing chaos, like letting people see the ugliness. And if they don't like it, being like, that's okay. That's okay. And if they do like it, knowing that they're the special ones you have to keep around.
Is there any way in which she kind of solved some of the chaos?
Absolutely. I mean, that's another great point. Like, a young company basically is one of the ways it's very cathartic, Ella, is that companies are like children. Like children are quite literally, if you have them yourself, are genetic projections of you. Like they are at least half you. And companies are like that too, where like it was my company, I was the only founder. So suction cups were all over my body, just sort of building this thing. And so the company, when you really look at what my company is, like if for the people that really know me, it's me. It's like my soul. And in the early days when I was the only one wired up, it was my soul, which means it fucking sucked in some ways. Like there were huge aspects of it that were missing or really, huge holes, huge gaps because they're weaknesses of mine. And then it was strong in other ways. And so then when you take some of your suction cups and you give them to Shannon or you give them to Jason or like other people, you get some of Shannon's life force in there. You get some of Jason's life force. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, cool. Like some of those holes are now strengths. And, the business starts to resemble a mixture of a couple different people's life forces. And we can cover each other's weaknesses, right? Like that's what a good romantic partnership is. And a good business partnership is that somehow the mixture is greater than the sum of its parts.
To go back to your point about window dressing and how everybody is doing it, how do you kind of get in that headspace of needing to put out a fire behind the scenes and then really quickly needing to pivot and put on a brave and happy face to investors and just navigating that?
I think it's actually the answer, like the question you just asked, though it seems a little different. They're very connected. Like finding beauty in the chaos, which is sort of a truism, but like, I think I told you on a previous video, Ella, that I like myself for the first time in my life in the past 6 months. And I don't think it's a coincidence that I also like my company in a profound way for the first time in the past 6 months. So when you realize that the chaos isn't so bad, like that you actually find it's not fake beauty. It's not like you see the chaos, you hate it, you're embarrassed of it, and then you got to spin it and turn it into beauty somehow for this dick who's outside like wanting to, bust your chops about stuff in an investor meeting or a sales meeting. If instead you're like I actually really fundamentally believe in my business. Like I really think it should exist. I think it will exist. If I don't build it, it will be built. Like I think the world needs what I'm trying to build. I really believe that, like with every fiber of there's not a doubt in my mind. And there have been doubts in my mind all throughout the history of the bit. There isn't one now. And so it's a lot easier to arm yourself when you're walking into a meeting. Like there's no salesmanship. It's not me memorizing a talk track or figuring out the winding road to take them down so that it looks or feels convincing. It's like, I just fucking believe, motherfucker. Ask me whatever you want. Like, what do you want? Like, I'll tell you what you need to know, but I believe, and I like, no matter how you come at this, it's going to end in me believing. Right. And that's harder to take down. It's like, I fucking hate Simon Sinek. I don't know if you know him, but the whole start with why TED talk that everyone talks about, like if you're a what, what do you make? Well, I make the hub. Or a how do you make the hub? Well, this is how I make. But if you're a why, this is why I believe, this is why I built the hub. This is my fundamental belief in where this industry is going and so on. Like those things are much more profound and therefore a lot harder to like poke little baby holes in.
I'm just curious, some of the tactics that you used in the past to kind of put on that brave face? And just looking back at that past you, is there anything you kind of learned or would have done differently?
Yeah. I think the biggest mistake, and it didn't really bite me, it would have bitten me if I'd gotten further in the process with investors, but I didn't get far enough with any of them for them to look this deep into my model. But when I first tried to raise money, as I told you, we had just finished building the software, the new version of the software, and we were trying to grow. And we really did do this. We like hockey sticked for the first 3 months while I was talking to investors. I'd like email them, hey, another month of 30% growth, isn't that cool? Like, boop, 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 boop. But it was all kind of bullshit. It was like me in very unscalable ways convincing people to post jobs on our platform, throwing 100% discount codes like they were candy, just like throwing the kitchen sink, like anything I can do, torching money, torching energy, just getting people to use the damn thing. Which isn't sustainable. And I haven't looked at it, but I bet of our first 100 customers, 2 of them use the hub to this day. Whereas of the last 100 customers that have used the hub, the last 100 brands that have posted jobs on the hub, 72 of them will keep using the hub in the future. So we found what's called product market fit, that what the hub does and who it services are wedded. In other words, like what we're trying to accomplish, which is helping brands create content. We found the very brands that want to do that on our platform. And so that when they do it and they try our platform out, they like it so much that they come back again and again and again and again and again, which to an investor is very encouraging. So not pumping your funnel, not trying to just show growth for growth's sake, but actually trying to find that product market fit.
A lot of the talk about finding somebody to just invest in your company kind of dwells on this bottom line idea of just finding somebody who you can convince to give you money. But is there anything else that you look for in the right investor fit for your company? Like, are there any ideals that you're really looking for in like the dream best case scenario?
Yeah, I sincerely hope the metrics that we're projecting for when I'm going to raise my next round are astronomically higher than they have to be to raise the money I'm trying to raise. Like before we were like maybe like a little bit below where you want to be ideally, and I got a lot of no's. Now we're not just like there or a little bit of, it's like way above. We could almost raise the next round of funding with the metrics that we will have. So I'm hoping that because I'm hoping this will be, a layup, which doesn't really happen in entrepreneurial endeavors, but I'm hoping because this is so convincing that I'll have a lot of yeses and therefore a lot of people to choose from. And I'll have the luxury of not having to just take whatever money, but to be able to be very choosy about what money I take. And I think like alignment of vision is important so that you don't have the chefs being like, you know what, I think we should like make Thai food. And you're like, well, that's funny because we're like a French restaurant. Like, why do you think that? Right? Like you don't want the people in the kitchen like completely trying to change how you're doing your shit. So alignment of vision is important. Mentorship. I think at least 60 or 70% of this is like me just being intense, irreverent, whatever. But I haven't had a meaningful mentor in my life, really. Certainly not since starting this company, which is kind of odd, right? Like I'm a lone founder. I started the company by myself. And I didn't have like someone to look up to or someone to explain these things to me. I just like made every mistake in the book and ate shit and have learned from my own mistakes instead of taught myself. But I haven't had, 1 or 2 or 3 people that have gone through this before, that have seen it work, that actually can guide me. So if I could, that's what investors pitch to you, whether it's true or not. I have my suspicions, but they say like, listen, it's not just money if they really like you. So I've never had this said to me because no one's liked my company this much. But from what I hear, it's like, if you were pitching me, I'd be like, oh my gosh, I want to invest. It's not just the $1 million check I'm going to write you, but like we can help you hire people. We have a great network, and like it seems like you might need a COO, so we can help you with that. We can make connections to all of these corporates that might be interested in working with you. We can help you, and they try to sell you on why they're the right money, why they're the right people. So my hope would be that in addition to strategic alignment and them sharing my vision, I also have people to help shape that vision and give me mentorship and help me learn in ways that don't involve me spending money and time making mistakes.
I'm also curious too. I know a lot of this conversation is centering around, the swinging doors that investors don't see with regard to your team. But can it also be applied to what consumers or customers don't see when it comes to your team? And are there nuances between that, the difference between investors and consumers, or are they more similar than people believe?
Definitely differences. It's a great question. It sort of takes me in a slightly different direction, which I'm happy to go in, which is, I talked before about putting the suction cups on my chest and the company looking like me and having my strengths, having my weaknesses. One of my strengths, I think, is branding. Like that's just professionally how I was trained. I worked as a brand strategist for 4 years out of college, and I'm pretty good at building brand, So, the hub is pretty slick. Like you go to the website and you look at all the work and there are 40,000 creators, and it's become very clear over the past couple of years that people think it's particularly particularly customers or creators, not investors, think that we're like a 100-person to 500-person company. Like they think we're a huge business. Like I get this all the time. And for a while, I thought that was a good thing. And I would sort of muse when someone would imply that, and I would just sort of like let them think it. Like, I guess that's kind of cool. Like they'll probably spend more money, they'll trust me more, that's great. But people have very high expectations and or sometimes just resentment for like the corporate, like if something ever goes wrong on our platform, customers will write me these really nasty emails. And I usually try to work in like, oh, I'm so sorry, it took us a couple hours to get back to you. We're actually just a team of 3 people. I'll just throw that in now. And a lot of times they'll immediately be like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. Like, I'm so sorry. And they treat me completely differently when they realize that we're like a startup small business that's rubbing sticks together. I had a call with a customer today. She's done 10 shoots on the platform. And she's like, you killed the first 9. The 10th one I didn't like. We've given her all kinds of coupons along the way, all kinds of special help. And she was really angry. And so at some point I just sort of teased in, yeah, it's hard. Shannon, my co-founder, is out with COVID. She's sick with COVID right now. And so it's just me and one other person kind of running the ship. And like, so I'm sorry that happened. And I just sort of like tied it in. And she was really taken aback, because I think she thought that she was this little company and that I didn't just sort of immediately reimburse her for her shoot without even blinking for $1,000. Like $1,000 is a lot of money to me right now. So just like blindly giving her $1,000 would be a huge hit on my bank. Like I would feel that. Right. And I think she thinks that I have 26 million in the bank and what's a grand? Like I'm a small company. Why are you being so greedy? So you asked before about honesty and lifting the curtain, and like, well, I think investors, I still have to show as much polish as I can. To our customers, I've really brought them in, and that's been a really big turning point and very helpful.
And then what do you tell your team about this outside veneer, so you can have a united front?
Ella, you're killing it today. These are great questions. I did something that I think everyone should do. So if people are still watching this episode, I think you can do it in your personal life, by the way, if you're not an entrepreneur. But certainly if you're an entrepreneur, I made the presentation that I'm going to show an investor on February 15th. And I made it, a couple weeks ago. So 6 months away. And I'm like, I sort of played mind games with myself and my team. I'm like, I don't want to have to change this. Like, I want to show this presentation. I do not want to change a thing. If I printed this one out by accident instead of the real one and I put it down, I do not want to be lying. So I have all kinds of future truths that are not yet true. Numbers. We're going to hit this and this percentage growth and this many people have posted this many jobs and so on and so forth. And that's what we're aiming for. That's what we're trying to manifest. And I go to my team and I say, Ella, this is you right here. These two numbers, like, I need you to focus on these two, like, you got to hit these two numbers. Here's how we're going to do it. We're going to meet, once a week, twice a week, and talk about it and so on. But when you give each team member like a page of like, this is your page of the deck, or this is your number, like, make this true, manifest this, it gives supreme focus and purpose to what they're doing. And me focus as the leader. I know exactly where I want to be in 6 months, and I know what every single person is going to do to get us there. And in theory, if they believe and are good at their jobs, which everyone on my team is, they'll hit their numbers. And in theory, if they hit their numbers, we all hit our numbers. And if we all hit our numbers, in theory, the money's pretty easy to raise. And then the cool thing, Ella, is I'm taking the presentation for 6 months from now, and I'm showing it to investors today. I'm saying, this is the deck I'm going to show you in 6 months. Literally, I say this. What do you think? What's missing? Is this investable? And as they give me feedback, I can change the future. And it's kind of Babe Ruth, I'm calling my shot. I'm like, this is where we're going to be. I'll see you in 6 months. I want to let you know this is where we're going to be. We're not raising now. We're good. But in 6 months, this is where we're going to be, just to let you know, so you have a heads up. And then in 6 months, it comes true, and I look like I know what the fuck I'm doing,
And then my last question to you is that while a lot of consumers do appreciate honesty, especially, on social media and all of that, there is also this phenomenon. You mentioned Outdoor Voices for one, when there was that big expose on how the company was just going up in flames. There was a lot of schadenfreude, I think, on social media.
There's a lot of what?
Schadenfreude.
Mm-hmm.
Why that flip side? If everybody appreciates the honesty when it's coming from the company, but still revels in the true honesty of the chaos, as a founder, do you have a responsibility to mitigate some of that chaos in case worst case scenario, you get exposed in the New York Times?
It's a hard question to end on, because there's a lot that company did wrong. I mean, they grew in a completely irresponsible way. They are like the poster child for what I'm talking about, which is they raised and raised and raised and raised, and they acquired customers for 5x the cost. They were operating at a $44 million loss, I think, or something like that, on a monthly basis, just torching money, acquiring customers that were never paying for themselves. And just each time they raised money, they just raised more cash and torched more cash and so on. So that's the lie of venture capital. I don't know that a woman's name is Ty, who started it. I've heard her speak a few times, and like, I don't know that it's her fault. I think she just sort of got caught up in like an e-com bubble. Like, direct to consumer e-commerce is this punchy thing, and investors find it very sexy. She's very smart, very formidable. Female founders are very, in vogue, and she's very investable. And so they just, threw money at her, and she was young and didn't probably have the discipline as a sole founder herself to say no. So I empathize with her. In terms of, society, and like, I think she should have run the business better. I don't think it would have been appropriate for her to sort of share her financials or how she was scaling the business with customers. I don't know how you do that in a tasteful way. A much larger conversation for another time, Ella, is like this concept of cancel culture, and like people loving to hate, and sort of, there's a lot of angst writ large in our society for good reason, but a lot of it gets pointed in weird directions sometimes. And people forget how powerful they are, when they have 10,000 followers or 100,000 followers and they say something, like, a lot of people can listen, right? And so I think people don't realize how much power they wield. And when you get this mob of people that are shitting on a company or a person or an idea, it can be very engulfing for the person on the other end of that. So I empathize with her. I don't know how she could have done it differently, other than growing the company more patiently and with more responsibly. But I also don't think she deserved the amount of hate that she got.
Got it. Well, that was my last question, and that just takes us to time. Is there anything else that we didn't touch on in this past hour that you would want?
Always, Ella. I could talk to you for hours, but no, I think that was good.
Cool. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Of course. And I'll get this back to you ASAP.
Take care.